G'day folks, welcome to this first video in a series where I'm going to be talking about tactics in the Grand Tactical Series. I'm going to focus in this video on invasion tactics as played out on the beach overlays, focusing in this video on Juno Beach. This has been set up for Intermediate Scenario 4. We have the 3rd Canadian Division invading around Courcelles and Bonnier-sur-Mer. And immediately we need to think about how they're going to get this job done. I need to preface this by saying that I'm by no means an expert on the Grand Tactical Series. I've played through a lot of the beach landing scenarios, I've played through some of the intermediate scenarios and other Grand Tactical Series titles. I will recommend Lee Forrester's videos and Ty's videos, both on YouTube, which I'll link to below. They both sort of go into the details behind their decisions. They and other commentators often have differences of opinion on how to get this done. So I'm going to share my views with my limited experiences. So take everything here with a grain of salt. It's really designed partly as a conversation starter and partly to kind of inform very new players about how to implement the rules. It is one thing to understand the rules for this, the exclusive rules, the naval sequence of play. It's another step to understand how to implement those rules effectively, how to get onto the beaches effectively and make a good start. Now, I also want to say that your tactics, your invasion tactics will vary depending on what scenario you're playing. If you're playing one of just the beach overlay, storming gold, storming sword, storming Juno, you have limited turns. You really need to rush to meet the kind of primary and secondary tasks of that scenario, and you'll be doing things expending command points and exhausting your troops, risking step losses just to meet the objectives of that specific scenario. And you wouldn't necessarily do this in the larger scenarios like this one, or certainly the campaign scenarios where you need to sustain the health of your troops. So the tactics you employ, how hard you push your troops, will certainly vary depending on what you're doing. If you're playing the larger scenario, as I said, you will be more focused on trying to preserve step losses and so forth. So the tactics that you employ, and by tactics, invasion tactics here, what I'm really focusing on is whether you focus on obstacles, gaps, or nests. Now, the second point I need to make is that your priorities here will differ depending on the beach. Gold, Juno, and Sword are three very different beaches. Sword Beach is infamously crowded, and you will want to prioritize gaps earlier on the Sword Beach to clear the beach so that it doesn't become too overcrowded. It's almost inevitable that it becomes overcrowded, but clearing these gaps earlier on Sword reduces that clutter, reduces the modifier, and helps get those troops off the beach. On Juno Beach, it is less of a priority. Still important to clear those gaps, of course, but less so than obstacles and the very high nests. Nests here start at 8. That's quite a powerful nest firepower value. So that may be an early priority. So there's no, I don't think there's a one rule for all beaches. What I'm really trying to do here is raise some of these considerations that you'll need to make. And I'll go through obstacles, gaps, and nests. So Lee Forrester talks in his video about getting the tanks on first, using them to reduce the nests and the obstacles, and bringing your engineers on last to preserve them at 2 steps such that they are more effective when firing at beach defences. Those engineers are very important because they can, on a 0 to 3 on their fire roll, they can reduce obstacles or gaps by 2, and that's very important. Lee also highlights the importance in his video of getting the leaders on early. Getting those leaders on, typically with the first units to land, enables them and every subsequent unit of their formation to use their leadership capabilities to have a second, to be in command in effect, and use all those in command capabilities. So many people will focus on obstacles first for the simple reason that they are more effective in damaging your landing craft. They fire on the dual purpose row. When the obstacle level is 4 or 5, and you roll a 4 or 5, they will cause a hit, a step loss. So ideally, you want to reduce that to at least 3. And again, Lee Forrester talks about how many people will get it to 3 and then stop. That's my preferred approach. I like to just ensure that these units landing don't take a step loss. So I focus on getting those obstacles down to 3 and then focusing on the nests. Again, some people will focus, I think Lee prefers to focus on getting obstacles all the way down so they can do no damage at all. Once that obstacle level is down to 0, they will no longer fire. The benefit of that is no attacks, but once they're on 1, 2, or 3, my thinking is they're causing either a suppression or a cohesion hit, and they can be recovered from. I think it's more important to get them to 3 and then focus on, generally, my general approach is to then focus on nests and gaps thirdly. Now at Juno Beach, these nests initially do a lot of damage, as they did historically. With a value of 8 and rolling on the small arms column, they can eliminate a unit almost immediately. An 8 will eliminate it, 7 will cause a step loss. So it's important, again, to get this down to at least 6 or less. So my thinking is, on Juno Beach, getting obstacles down to 3 so they can't cause step losses, and then immediately getting the nests down to 6. This, of course, takes into effect the mass and the defense rating of the landing craft. So they do have a -1 modifier, which should prevent, in many cases, their elimination instantly. There's still that risk of step losses, and getting them down to 7, 6 will alleviate those concerns. So that's, again, on Juno Beach, that's a second priority. At other beaches where the nest value is lower, it is less of a concern. You may have other priorities, like again on Sword Beach, getting a gap open at least. So at both at Gold and Sword Beach, the nests there start at level 5. They've both got 5 level 5 beach obstacles, and they both have gaps at 4, so they're easier to reduce there. This, however, is a broader beach with the gaps spread out far more widely from the far left to the very far right. Now, thirdly, gaps. Typically the lowest priority in the first sort of wave of attacks, but it very soon becomes a priority. Once these units start to land and build up, you need to get them off the beaches. And again, I like to get gaps to at least 2, to at least have a gap open to have some way for these units to get off the beach. And again, your engineers are very valuable for reducing those gaps. It's worth considering who is doing this damage as well. Now, of course, your landing craft are great for reducing those nests level, and they can do that from the very start. Your tanks also are good for reducing nests. Now, the funnies of the 79th Armoured Division also play an important role because they can help reduce any of these beach defences by perhaps 1 or 2 if they roll less than 6. So they're very important early on in particular for, in my view, focusing on those obstacles and perhaps gaps if they have a chance. So I think probably what I'm conveying here is my preference for obstacles, nests, and gaps, with recognition that it varies depending on what scenario you're playing, how long that scenario is, and of course what beach you're at. The tactics will vary from beach to beach. They will vary depending on how long the scenario is. They will vary depending on how well your first wave of attacks go. If you're really struggling with step losses, you may need to focus more on those obstacles and nests. If there's overcrowding, you may need to focus more on gaps. It depends on how well you barrage the initial Wittgenstein nests, in terms of have you successfully blinded them, can you move, have you eliminated any of the steps, and are you landing in these sort of zones of fire where they can hit back on those landing waves quite hard. These will all kind of shape your initial tactics. Now, as I said at the beginning, I am not an expert. I recommend again going to Lee Forrester's video and Ty's videos and having a look at what they say. They've had a lot more experience in GTS than I have. I'm just sort of, having played through a lot of these maps, thinking more about how I get things done and thinking about what my priorities are for these longer scenarios. By all means, I welcome constructive criticism and feedback on this. If I respect Lee's expertise and his preference for clearing the obstacles out completely. Let me know your thoughts if you've played through these scenarios and what you think about what your priorities should be. I'd be happy to hear back from what other experienced gamers think about their invasion tactics.